Hey everybody, good to be back with you all again. As you all know, I'm a big fan of JRPGs, especially the Megami Tensei and Shin Megami Tensei franchises. But up until recently, I had never actually played the games that started it all. The first on the list was this one, translated to Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. There were two versions of the game with very different gameplay mechanics, with one being made for personal computers, and the other being the Famicom version that I'm holding right here. Since neither this nor its sequel, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2, ever saw the light of day in the US, a lot of us never got to try these out. Luckily, an English patch was released thanks to Espernight and their team of hackers and translators, which I'll link to in the description below. This has finally given people like me a chance to play it and see just what we were missing out on in 1987. Jesus, this thing came out the year I was born. With that said, let's take a look and see just how well Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei for the Famicom holds up today. Developed by Atlus and published by Namco in 1987, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei is the first game in the long-running Megami Tensei franchise of JRPGs. Originally based off a series of 3 novels by Aya Nishitani, we would see one anime OVA come out, and later on, the PC and Famicom versions of the games. The game stars 2 high school students, Akemi Nakajima and Yumiko Shirisagi, in a story that's actually based off the 3rd novel in the trilogy. Nakajima is a highly intelligent student who figures out a way to create a demon summoning program, hence the Digital Devil Story part of the title. This program eventually goes haywire as the demons begin to take physical form and attack humans. Nakajima is later saved by Yumiko, and the two go on to defeat the demons. It's also revealed that Nakajima is the reincarnation of a god named Izanagi, and Yumiko is the reincarnation of the goddess Izanami. This makes perfect sense, as Megami Tensei in English actually translates to reincarnation of the goddess. Now that you know where the series got its name from, we can continue. Following the defeat of the demons at Nakajima and Yumiko's hand, Lucifer returned, building a giant labyrinth in the land of Asuka, and kidnapping Izanami along the way. It's up to Nakajima and Yumiko to defeat the demons, rescue Izanami, and defeat Lucifer once and for all. The gameplay system is heavily based off the one seen in the Wizardry series up to this point. It consists of your main characters walking through labyrinth-like mazes, fighting monsters, and gaining experience to level up your stats and gain new abilities. This style of gameplay is also referred to as a dungeon crawler. In order to differentiate it from the Wizardry series and make the game stand on its own, scenario writer Kazunari Suzuki came up with the idea of giving your party the ability to talk, negotiate with, and even recruit enemy demons that you came across. On top of this, the player would also be given the ability to fuse demons together, bringing even more powerful monsters into the party. These two features, as well as the general occult theme and atmosphere among other things, would go on to define an entire franchise of sequels, spin-offs, and other media. Let's delve more into the areas you'll be traversing through here. The world in this game is divided into 6 general areas that make up the Devilopolis: Daedalus Tower, the Valhalla Corridors, Bien the Sky Castle, the Mazurka Corridors, the Sea of Flames, and finally Infini Palace, where Lucifer is waiting. Each of these locations require wandering through countless hallways, solving puzzles, and getting through other traps, all while dealing with random enemy encounters along the way. These areas also have multiple boss fights to deal with before you can move forward. Now let's talk more in depth about the gameplay mechanics, as they are likely to intrigue some and outright frighten others. Outside of battle, you can move forward with the up button and change the direction you're facing with the left and right buttons. The down button will turn your direction around. If you press the action button, you can open a small menu, which will allow you to check the status of your characters and demons, call the demons you've collected into battle, cast magic spells like healing or generating the map, and use a jewel to heal your party if you've got one in your inventory. Hitting the B button will also move you from the menu to the map square, which a map will appear in if you've cast the spell to generate it. When combat begins, you're given the option to either fight, run, select the order your party attacks in, or auto-battle. After this, you can choose what Nakajima and Yumiko will do on each turn. While Yumiko has the ability to cast spells, Nakajima is capable of talking to and negotiating with the demons in battle, assuming it's one of the demons you can actually recruit. All characters, including demons, have the ability to guard, which will dramatically decrease the damage taken if they are attacked in the same turn. Unlike most RPGs, I actually found the guard mechanic in this game to work pretty well, as I managed to keep multiple characters alive for a longer period of time thanks to it. You'll also become very grateful for the auto battle option, as these fights can get pretty lengthy, and trust me, they will occur quite often. Instead of multiple enemies appearing on the screen, you'll simply see one appear with the text below, telling you exactly how many enemies you're actually facing. You'll come to see this as one of the many technical limitations that the developers ran into when trying to make a Famicom game of such a large scale. You'll also see this when it comes to environments. While each room does have its own fixed maps and directions to go in, the hallways will all typically look the same until you reach the next area, and so forth. It will certainly be disorientating for those who have never played a dungeon crawler before, and even more so for those who don't like the idea of seeing the same things in almost every room you encounter. This is where the game's handicaps begin to show themselves as well. The map spell? It costs 2 MP per use, which isn't much in and of itself, but you'll come to see it wears off every time you get to a new moon as seen in the top left corner. The effects of the map will wear off, and you won't be able to cast the spell successfully again until the moon's phase has changed. Each phase of the moon will affect the demons you encounter in different ways, which can also be hard to keep track of. Here's where things get really specific. While Yumiko will eventually gain healing spells as you level up, you do not start out with any. This gives you only 2 ways to heal your characters. One is to find and use a jewel. Unfortunately, the jewels are rare, and you won't be able to get far early on until you've leveled up multiple times. This leaves the second option, going back to the beginning of the game. Yes, without any MP on you, and before you've unlocked later areas in the game like Sky City, healing in this game requires you to go all the way back to the 8th floor of Daedalus Tower, where you started, and find a person that will heal you. Even more of a kicker than that? It costs money to do so. The more HP and MP you've lost, the more it costs to heal. Don't have money on you? Tough luck. And it only gets more confusing from there. The demons you summon will require money. The stronger the demons are, the more they will cost to summon. After summoning them, you will slowly lose more magnetite with each step you take. Once you run out, your demon's HP will begin to gradually decrease until the demon has become exhausted. This makes wandering around even more of a risk, as you really need these demons to stay alive in order to get anywhere. But you don't want to risk dying, which can easily happen. If a demon is exhausted and wasn't killed in battle, they will begin to regain their HP as you continue to walk. It's possible to call them back before this and conserve some magnetite if you think it won't affect your performance in the area. If they have died, however, you'll have to return once again to the 8th floor of Daedalus Tower and speak to the man who can revive them. For more money, of course. This same man will also allow you to fuse your demons, but you still have to return to him every time you want it done. One more major point to make about this game's setup is its save system. It doesn't have one. Once again, due to hardware limitations, the only way to keep your progress is with a password system, and the only way to get this password is to return to the beginning of the game, sensing a pattern yet, in order to speak to the man who has it and write it down. Oh, and if you get a status effect on your characters like paralysis or being turned to stone, yeah, you guessed it, you have to go back to the beginning of the game to get it removed. One more little nasty surprise the game can throw at you is making you fight more than once in a row, sometimes as many as 3 fights without any break in between. It happens pretty infrequently on the first few floors of the Daedalus Tower, but that quickly changes from then on. In case you haven't already guessed, this can lead to an extremely frustrating experience in the first few hours, and will likely keep others from even wanting to continue. Heck, I almost gave up on progressing in this a couple of times, but all hope was not lost just yet. Here was my starting strategy. Dying sends you back to the 8th floor of Daedalus Tower again, but thankfully with all of your levels and captured demons intact. It leaves you with the handicap of having your money halved and your jewels taken away, but this would at least allow my characters to grow a little more and get their footing before I felt comfortable enough to press on. I took full advantage of this and tried pressing on a little farther each time, getting in any fights I could and recruiting any demons that were possible to recruit and try fusing. By the time we'd all be getting exhausted, I would usually just let the characters die so I could go back and start all over with my leveled up characters. This allowed me to grind and grind until I wasted enough time to get my characters to their highest possible levels. Yes, I was one of those guys in this instance. From there, I could finally experience the rest of the game, and more importantly, tell you all about it here. As you continue into the game, you begin to notice other little tricks that halt you from progressing. One of the strangest and arguably most annoying are the bright areas. These are denoted by the obnoxious-looking checkerboard patterns across the screen. In these areas, even if you have a map, you will not be able to see and have to simply guess what direction you need to go in. Early on in the game, it's not much of a problem, but as you reach the final few areas, it begins to border on maddening, especially since you can still get into random battles in these areas, throwing off your concentration even further. After defeating the game's first boss, the Minotaur, you unlock an elevator that allows you to quickly go up and down the various floors of the Daedalus Tower, which admittedly helps with backtracking, but can still be a pain since you have to take long walks to get through it. More importantly, this also opens up the Valhalla Corridors, the first different-looking area in the game. I couldn't even begin to tell you how happy I was to see something that wasn't a blue brick wall for 5 seconds. Still, the enemies in this area would prove to be even harder, while I looked around more mazes to find the Shield of Garu in order to enter BN, the Sky City. Only after defeating the bosses of this area do you finally unlock another area to heal in, and buy better weapons and armor for your characters. Unfortunately, things like fusing demons and curing status effects must still be done at the beginning area of the game, so watch out. The Sky City is easily one of the most important areas in the game. After defeating all the bosses and saving the town, you encounter a man who can fly and steer the city into any of the upcoming areas you'd like to reach, including the final palace. But if you didn't already guess, it's never quite that easy. Just like in the previous area, defeating all of the bosses in each one of these will usually grant you access to an elevator to get around faster with, but it still requires a lot of walking around and random encounters to go through, and that's not even mentioning the memorization involved in navigating all of this. Figuring out what you even need to do in some of these areas can be quite confusing. While there are friendly characters that can help you and give hints, their locations are just as hidden as any of the items and places you typically need to find. One of the most draining parts for me was finding out I needed to get 3 special gems in order to free Izanami with, based on little to no context. Even figuring out where to put which gem on her mask was a chore, as getting it wrong would literally warp you back to the beginning of the game. Again! And it just gets more brutal from there. As you go deeper into the labyrinth, you begin to encounter other traps, like platforms that hurt you simply for touching them, platforms that teleport you despite looking just like the others, and even platforms that turn you in another direction, just to throw you off and force you into more random encounters, etc. Oh, and did I mention there are enemies capable of decreasing your level? Yeah, this game is cruel. Very, very cruel. It does not care about your feelings. All it knows is pain. Pain and suffering. This is what we in the gaming community like to call artificial difficulty. It refers to a game that tries to trick the player into losing and getting game overs based on chance and other factors that have nothing to do with the player's skill. This also applies to most battles in the game, as there is usually little strategy beyond grinding enough to win. The same even goes for the boss battles, with the exception of the last 2. Once you had the items needed to battle Hecate, for example, he wasn't that tough to conquer. I honestly had more trouble finding the items to defeat him with than actually winning the fight. Even the previous boss Loki seemed a lot harder to take down. But those last 2 fights, oh man. After collecting yet another necessary key item with barely any information on finding it, and walking through a bright area, as well as unlocking a hidden door in that bright area, you finally encounter Set. This guy has a move that's capable of freezing 4 members of your party each turn, preventing any of your attacks from happening if you didn't get them in fast enough, and forcing you to simply start the next turn. It took a lot more effort to keep my party alive and get a good offensive going. I only managed to win by the skin of my teeth, with almost no MP left over, and a few lucky turns with Set getting temporarily paralyzed. This fight actually made me stop and question if I wanted to continue putting myself through all of this, as I couldn't imagine how hard the final battle would be. But I was determined, and wasn't going to let my own fears get the best of me. Even before taking on Lucifer, it's necessary to find an item called the White Dragon Gem. Problem is, it's in a completely hidden location in a palace you had conquered before, but couldn't access. The only way to find it is to go to the final palace, locate the person who will tell you the secret of the bottomless holy pot, locate an equally random item called Rick's Bracelet in a completely different part of the Valhalla basement floor, bring it to this bottomless holy pot location, and finally obtain the gem. If you don't get it, Lucifer can heal himself at will, making the fight unwinnable. Guess who found all this out the hard way? As expected, the fight with Lucifer is no joke either. On top of having the same freezing attack as the last boss, Set, Lucifer is also capable of inflicting large amounts of damage to 4 party members at once. It took all of my strongest fusions, with Odin being by far the biggest help, and a ton of planning with Yumiko and Odin's MP usage to work this fight out. By the time it was over, I had completely run out of MP, and was simply having Yumiko guard to stay alive. After realizing that all my MP was gone, I simply said to myself, well, I gave it my best shot. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then, something happened. it was over. It was finally over. The game ends with a surprisingly beautiful scene of Nakajima and Yumiko holding one another as the tower begins to crumble. Both Izanagi and Izanami appear in the sky, thanking you for bringing peace back to the world before departing to the heavens once again. The end. But what did I honestly think of all of this? Well, let's start with the things I did enjoy. I really like the general themes and atmosphere of the game, and appreciate what the developers tried to do with the limited amount of memory that they had at the time. The majority of demons that weren't just reskins of other demons looked pretty cool, and I began to enjoy seeing what other kinds of things I'd encounter as I progressed. The other aspects that made this game unique, like the demon negotiation and demon fusions, were all very well made, and still hold up surprisingly well even now. I also enjoyed the game's soundtrack, composed by Tsukasa Masuko. Although we didn't get a huge variety of tracks to accompany the game, each one fit with the overall tone and atmosphere wonderfully. But aside from that, everything else about this game is just cruel from start to finish. There is no doubt about why it was successful upon its release, as this was truly a revolutionary title back in 1987. But today, even the most patient of gamers are going to have a hard time finishing this one, let alone getting past the first boss fight. The sheer amount of traps and dead ends designed to confuse you, the constant random encounters with 1 to 3 fights every battle, the need to backtrack to the beginning of the game in order to fuse and revive your demons, and the lack of context about where to go or how to even complete most of your objectives is just brutal. I can only recommend this game to the most hardcore of Megami Tensei, Shin Megami Tensei, and Persona fans who want to learn more about how the series got its start, and the importance of the fusing and negotiating elements that would carry over to the future entries in the series. If this all sounds too intimidating, which is more than understandable in this case, then I'm happy to tell you that there is also a remake of the game and its sequel on the Super Famicom, called Kyoyaku Megami Tensei. On top of a huge graphical overhaul made to resemble the look and feel of the Shin Megami Tensei games, this version of the games also includes a save system and a new teleportation feature, among other changes. The game's difficulty is still for the most part intact, but this version is far less punishing and more user-friendly overall. The main losses incurred are the 8-bit artwork, which I actually quite enjoyed, and the excellent soundtrack from Masuko. If you've ever played an RPG from this era of gaming before, then this result shouldn't really come as much of a surprise. While I can certainly appreciate all of the creative decisions this game made at the time, and would go as far as to call it an important landmark in gaming history, it doesn't change the fact that many gamers would be heavily turned off by it today, without some kind of modern enhancements at least. With all that said, I am still glad I got the chance to experience it, if for anything else, so that I could share it with all of you here, and give you a little taste of what we were all missing out on at the time. Or give you a warning about what to keep far, far away from. The important thing is now you know. And that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and please let me know your thoughts on this game in the comments below. Also, if you're feeling generous, please consider donating to my Patreon, where awesome people like Brandon Basden and Erica Severid help to keep this channel going. I'll see you all again real soon.